December 6, 1917. A narrow channel of water in Halifax Harbour. Two ships are heading straight toward each other. One of them is the Mont-Blanc, a French cargo ship, loaded with over 2,000 tons of explosives, TNT, picric acid, gun cotton, barrels of benzol lashed to the deck. Enough firepower to level an entire city, packed into one hull. The Mont-Blanc wasn't even supposed to be in a rush. Ships carrying cargo this dangerous were required to fly a special red flag, warning every other vessel in the harbor to stay clear. But on this particular morning, that flag was never raised. Nobody on the water had any way of knowing what they were sharing the channel with. The other ship is the Emo, a Norwegian relief vessel, already running late, trying to make up lost time before dark. Neither captain wants to be the one who slows down, neither one wants to give way. So they do something ships are never supposed to do. They both hold their course and they both signal each other. One long horn blast, then another. But in the noise and confusion of a busy harbor, the signals get crossed. Each captain believes the other ship is the one pulling aside. Neither one actually is. The gap between them keeps shrinking. By the time either crew realizes what's happening, there isn't enough water left to turn. The Emo strikes the side of the Mont-Blanc. The collision itself is almost nothing, a glancing blow, barely enough to dent the hull. But metal scraping against metal throws off sparks. And those sparks land directly on the open barrels of benzol sitting on deck. The fuel catches instantly. Flames climb up the side of the ship within seconds. The crew of the Mont-Blanc knows exactly what that means. They know precisely what's stacked below deck. So they don't even attempt to fight the fire. They abandon ship immediately, rowing away as fast as they can, screaming warnings toward the shore the entire time. But almost nobody on land speaks French. Halifax in 1917 is a city consumed by the First World War. Convoys of soldiers passed through constantly. Freighters loaded with supplies crowd the harbor day and night. It is one of the busiest wartime ports on the entire Atlantic coast. Nobody watching that morning has any reason to suspect this particular ship is any different from the hundreds of others that pass through every single week. And even fewer people understand what a burning munitions ship actually means. The Mont-Blanc drifts, unmanned, engulfed in flame, straight toward Pier 6, one of the busiest, most crowded piers in the entire city. And instead of running, people start gathering, because a burning ship drifting slowly through the harbor looks less like a disaster and more like a spectacle. Office workers press against their windows to get a better look. Dock workers stop what they're doing and walk toward the water. School children are let outside to watch. Nobody standing on that shoreline has any idea what's actually floating towards them. They are looking directly at the largest man-made explosion the world has ever seen, and it hasn't gone off yet. At 9:04 in the morning, the Mont-Blanc reaches Pier 6, still burning, still drifting. And then it stops being a fire and becomes something else entirely. The explosion is instant and almost impossible to describe in normal terms. In a fraction of a second, the temperature at the center of the blast reaches roughly 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. To put that number into perspective, steel begins to melt at around 2,500 degrees. The blast at Halifax was hot enough to liquefy solid metal twice over. The ship itself is vaporized. Pieces of the Mont-Blanc's anchor, weighing over half a ton, are later found more than 2 miles away. A cannon barrel from the ship lands nearly 3 miles inland. The force of the blast was later estimated to be equivalent to roughly 3 kilotons of TNT. For comparison, that's a significant fraction of the explosive yield of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima, nearly 3 decades later. Halifax experienced a preview of nuclear-scale destruction, using nothing but conventional chemical explosives packed onto a single cargo ship. The shockwave moves outward faster than sound itself, flattening entire city blocks before anyone even hears the blast that caused it. Buildings don't just collapse, they're erased. The north end of Halifax, an entire residential neighborhood, is wiped off the map in seconds. Windows shatter as far as 60 miles away. People in nearby towns feel the ground shake beneath their feet. A wall of water, pushed outward by the force of the explosion, rises into a tsunami. It slams into the shoreline, sweeping away anyone who survived the initial blast near the water's edge. Overhead, a mushroom cloud rises more than 3 miles into the sky, visible from almost every point in the city. And then comes the part almost nobody expects. Because glass is one of the most common materials in any city. Windows, storefronts, home fronts, every single one of them facing the harbor shatters at the exact same instant. Thousands of people, drawn to their windows by the burning ship only moments earlier, are struck directly in the face by flying glass. It becomes one of the leading causes of injury in the entire disaster. Doctors in the years that follow will document hundreds of cases of eye trauma and blindness, all traced back to that single moment. In less than 30 seconds, roughly 2,000 people are killed. Another 9,000 are injured. An entire section of a city, home to tens of thousands of people, simply ceases to exist. In the minutes after the explosion, Halifax is a city that no longer looks like a city. Streets are gone. Landmarks are gone. Survivors wander through the wreckage, unable to recognize the neighborhood they grew up in. Fires break out across the ruins, fed by shattered gas lines and overturned stoves. Rescue crews begin digging through the rubble almost immediately, pulling survivors out of the debris of homes that no longer have walls with their bare hands. Word of the disaster spreads fast. Trains loaded with doctors, nurses, and supplies begin racing toward Halifax from across the region. Some of that help comes from surprising places. The city of Boston, hundreds of miles away in the United States, hears about the disaster within hours. A relief train loaded with doctors, nurses, and medical supplies departs almost immediately, racing north through the night. It's one of the first major international relief efforts of its kind, forging a bond that continues to this day through an annual Christmas tree Halifax sends to Boston as a thank you. Some travel for hours through the night, arriving before sunrise the next morning. And that's when the second disaster hits. A massive blizzard rolls in overnight, dumping over a foot of snow across the ruined city. Temperatures plunge. Rescue efforts, already desperate, slow to a crawl. Survivors trapped beneath collapsed buildings, who might have been found and pulled free within hours, are instead buried deeper beneath layers of snow. Exhausted rescue workers now have to dig through rubble and a blizzard at the same time. Families who survived the blast now face a second fight just to stay alive through the night. Makeshift shelters are set up in whatever buildings are still standing. Blankets and coal are rationed. Doctors treat blast injuries and frostbite in the same breath. Overwhelmed hospitals now triage frostbite and hypothermia cases on top of everything else. Some survivors who made it through the explosion itself don't survive the night that follows. For days, the city exists in a kind of frozen limbo, neither fully rescued nor fully counted. It takes weeks before the true scale of the disaster is understood. Roughly 2,000 people dead, 9,000 injured, 25,000 more left without adequate shelter in the middle of a Canadian winter. All of it triggered by 2 ships and one moment of miscommunication in a channel barely wide enough for both of them to pass. For over 2 decades, the Halifax Explosion held a grim title, the largest man-made explosion in human history. Nothing built by humans had ever released that much destructive force in a single instant. Not until 1945, when the atomic bomb redefined what that word even meant. But in 1917, Halifax was the benchmark. The disaster that scientists, engineers, and military planners studied for years afterward, trying to understand exactly how much force a single explosion could unleash. The investigation into what actually happened took months. And in the end, the cause wasn't a bomb, or an attack, or a mechanical failure. It was two ships in a channel wide enough for both of them, making the same mistake at the same time. Neither captain willing to yield the right of way. A handful of confused signals. A collision that, on its own, barely damaged either vessel. It was never about the size of the ships or the skill of the crews. It was about a moment of hesitation, multiplied by 2,000 tons of unstable cargo in the middle of a crowded harbor. Halifax rebuilt slowly, painfully. The city that stands there today carries almost no visible scars of what happened on that pier. But the lesson underneath it never really faded. Because a quarter of a century later, in the depths of the Cold War, that same lesson would resurface. Except this time, it wouldn't be two ships in a harbor. It would be 3 officers locked inside a submerged nuclear submarine, forced to decide in seconds whether the world was already at war.